Limon, Colorado. A lonely prairie town infamous for being plastered on Denver highway signs. The town itself is quite quaint, but the railroad action is still very much alive. Limon was once a major junction between the Union Pacific and Rock Island railroads. Today, the former Rock Island tracks are owned and operated by the Kyle Railroad, a regional short line that runs east from Limon towards Phillipsburg and Salina, Kansas. The railroad is owned by the Genesee and Wyoming Holding Company, and their signature orange and yellow locomotives dominate the scene. However, not all their power is dressed in those colors, like we see here today, on the Limon to Salina freight train, as it begins its long, grueling journey across the high plains. Those unusual looking locomotives are MK50-3s, rebuilt from Morrison Knudsen MK5000Cs. Back in the 1990s, Morrison Knudsen entered the horsepower race with the 5,000 horsepower MK5000C. Only 6 of these locomotives were ever built, and they began life undergoing testing on the Southern Pacific and Union Pacific railroads. They featured a 12-cylinder Caterpillar 3612 prime mover, which produced 5,000 horsepower, one of the largest engine blocks ever used in North American rail service. Unfortunately, these locomotives faced numerous issues. Most notably, the main bearings on the 3612 prime movers were prone to wear, eventually rendering the locomotives inoperable. In 2001, Utah Railway acquired all 6 MK5000Cs for coal service over Soldier Summit. After just a year in operation, the original prime movers were replaced with EMD 645 engines from retired SD50s and one GP50. The units were then reclassified as MK50-3s, which we see today. When Utah Railway's coal contracts ended in 2017, all 6 locomotives were transferred to the Kyle Railroad for use on their own lines. Which brings us to today, as we watch these locomotives trek across the eastern Colorado prairie. While there are 2 locomotives on today's train, only one is currently operating, as an effort to save fuel. The lead unit will run until it runs out of fuel, at which point the second locomotive will take over. You might notice how slow the train is moving. While track speed is technically 40 miles an hour, a lack of maintenance has reduced operating speeds to around 10 miles an hour for most of the route. Interstate 70 parallels the old Rock Island line all the way to Colby, Kansas. As the train approaches Arriba, it reaches its top speed of around 25 miles an hour, passing a classic Rock Island installed railroad crossing. Don't let the rocking motion of the train cars alarm you. This is common practice known as controlled harmonic oscillation. If a train travels at consistent speeds between 13 and 21 miles an hour on jointed rail, the cars can wobble excessively and potentially derail. Fortunately, this train is holding steady at 25 miles an hour, so there's no danger today. I'm not exactly sure why that speed range is so hazardous, as I'm not a physicist. Once the train reaches Arriba, it drops back down to 10 miles an hour. At Flagler, the crew performs a quick set-out. The Kyle Railroad serves a variety of agricultural communities along its route. Here, they are setting out a cut of empty hoppers, presumably to be loaded with grain, which will eventually make its way to factories across the country and quite possibly end up on your plate as cereal or toast. Their setout gives us enough time to get ahead to the Sand Creek Bridge, just east of town. A tall bridge crosses the dried up Spring Creek, which is where we catch our MKs next. The train soon approaches the town of Stratton. Old searchlight signals and a vintage Rock Island depot still stand proudly here. As lighting conditions worsen, we concluded this chase at the Landsman Creek Bridge, built by the American Bridge Company, which we can see imprinted on the side. About a year later, we returned to Stratton in a completely different season, and once again, the Utah MKs are hard at work, this time heading west. We set up at the County Road 31 grade crossing, another classic Rock Island installation, still mostly original with 8-inch incandescent lights and a Safetran mechanical bell. Watch as the Utah units cruise by. We moved just west of town to capture the MK switching out Stratton. The old searchlights and depot provide a classic scene, a nostalgic glimpse into the past along the Rock Island rocket line. Speaking of the Rock Island's iconic Rocky Mountain rocket train once ran along this line. I can only imagine trains flying down the track at 70, 80, and maybe even 90 miles per hour. It's wild to think about, especially compared to the slow speeds we see today. Once switching duties are complete in Stratton, the Utah MKs continue westward toward Limon, bathed in some beautiful golden afternoon light. We return to the Spring Creek Bridge for another shot as the units crawl across. A bit of switching was needed in Vona, which took long enough for the sun to set. The crew contacts dispatch for a void and reissue of their track warrant to hold the main. I'll post the full radio exchange on my second channel, since it's a bit lengthy.
I got track warrant number 501-501 to the Utah 5004-5004, West, WEST. Date March 24th, 2023, 2023. Mark box 1 O&E, track warrant number 147-147 is void. Mark box 2 TWO, proceed from Mouthpost 484 MP484 to Mouthpost 486 MP486 on Goodland main track. Mark box 1616, track bulletins in effect 8383. Track warrant number 501 has 3 THR-EE boxes marked. These boxes are 1 O&E, 2 TWO, and 1616, over.
Sadly, time is running out for the Utah MK50-3s. The Kyle Railroad has recently acquired some former BNSF-9s to replace them, as parts for the MKs are limited and their age is showing. It's a shame to see them go, but I'm grateful I had the chance to capture these unique locomotives while they were still running. Thank you so much for watching this special video. I hope you enjoyed this tribute to some truly one-of-a-kind locomotives, and I hope to see you all again soon, along the Front Range and beyond. Goodbye.